a lot of people around the world are very tuned in to this election in the US right now. And not to put the United States like on a pedestal that I don't think we deserve necessarily, but I think there is some truth to it as well, that whatever happens in our election will impact people on a global scale to an extent.
Yeah, it does.
And so people are paying attention. People are concerned, rightfully so, even if they don't live here. And so I think I'm lucky because I have such a global audience that people are receptive to it across the board. Generally speaking, I try to focus more on topics and issues that I think people can rally behind, because I think that is universal no matter where you live.
Hey guys, welcome back to Disabled and Proud. This week I am joined by Jessica Jordan, also known as the Rolling Explorer. What's so lovely about this episode is that it's a bit like a little catch up for me and Jess. Outside of being podcasters, we're both actually really good friends. And it was so nice to bring you guys along for our catch up. But we speak about a lot of different things this week. One of them being American politics and how ingrained and intertwined they are with disability rights, and why this upcoming American election is so important for disabled people and for everybody else. But, you know, we really look at this through the disabled lens. We also speak about what it's like to move from the US to the UK and then back to the US again, and the different healthcare systems and what that involves and what that entails. And that experience as well, because it's not always easy trying to find the right doctors and the right people in the right places. And finally, we speak about disability and dating. And Jess is super candid and open and honest about her experience. And actually, it's been so lovely to watch her grow as a person, because I knew her when she lived in the UK. I know her now that she lives in the US. And it's been a really beautiful journey to watch. So I hope you guys love this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, because for us, it was just like bringing you guys along for a little catch-up dinner, which was lovely. And enjoy this episode, and I will see you guys soon. Welcome back, Jess, to Disabled and Proud.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm so honored to be back. Can't believe that it is a back situation. Honored that you've wanted me on twice now.
Oh, well, firstly, we became friends after the first podcast recording, and we've actually been friends literally ever since. And now it's just like having a lovely catch up with my pal, which we're recording, which is kind of strange, but also fabulous. I'm so happy you're here.
Likewise, and I can't think of a better way to catch up than sharing our experiences with dozens upon dozens upon dozens of people.
Do you know what, though? Sometimes it makes the best content listening to two friends that have a chinwag about their lives and like catching up. And actually, super interestingly, your life has completely changed since our first ever podcast. Like, you're in a completely different country. You're currently going through a divorce, which also must mean that how you view disability must have changed. Question mark at the end of that question.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's been so much change in the last, year and a half of my life. And we met long before that. So I was like fully into a different lifestyle entirely. And, disability has been at the forefront of that, just because as a disabled woman, like, it is so ingrained into my identity in every aspect of my life. So it's definitely been an interesting ride.
Yeah, for sure. Something that I'd actually love to dive into straight away is that you used to live in London and now you live in Chicago. And we all know that there is a big difference between how the UK sees disability and how the US sees disability. But the way that we see it, and I'm talking like the royal we, or like the masses, is mainly through like media and TV and representation. But actually, someone who's lived in both spaces and been on the ground, what is the difference like in like disability pride between the UK and the US, in your opinion?
That's such an interesting question, just because I have felt like such a shift since moving back to the US. And it's also funny to me because disability pride really began in the US. It was really like the catalyst for that was the signing of the ADA in 1990, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, for anybody that may never have heard the ADA phrase before. But essentially, I would expect that disability pride would be higher here in the US, but it's not. It's not. Disability is very much seen in the US as something that still needs to be overcome, something that needs to be fixed. There's no like worth really placed on it yet. Whereas when I was in the UK, I don't know if it's because in some ways it's a smaller community or more condensed, like everything seems like very close together in the UK, and so it's easier to rally a group together. Whereas here in the US, like outside of major city hubs, everything's very spread apart. And so getting people activated across state lines is really tough.
Yeah.
But I would say, generally speaking, here, there's much more accessibility. So from a standpoint of, again, that fix-it mindset, there's a lot more structural innovation that's in place. So that's nice. But in terms of being welcoming and accepting and understanding, that is lost here in the US, where I feel like when I was in the UK, I didn't get as much ableism in my day-to-day life from just people that I pass by on the street.
Honestly, I think that's so interesting, particularly like the point that you raised about the ADA. If nobody knows what that is, go and research it. I'd also really encourage you guys to go and find out who Judith Human was, because she was a massive proponent of that. And the fact, like, that is so true. Like, disability pride kind of started in that area, you know, like the ADA was a massive signing for American politics and also for disabled Americans, and then actually became really important for disabled people worldwide. So it would make sense that disability pride is really freaking strong in the US. And actually, I think it's really interesting what you say about how potentially because everybody is so spread out everywhere, there's not really like this central core of disability pride. It could be just like city based or like, you know, county based. Obviously it's not county lines, but you know what I mean. And actually in the UK, you're right, like we are all, I mean, realistically in the UK, you're never really more than 4 or 5 hours away from someone. And that's really like end to end of the country or side to side of the country. So actually trying to rally a lot of people in one space isn't as difficult as it is if you're in the States. And you're right, the disability community in the UK is kind of condensed because, and I hate to say it because it is so cliche, but the likeliness is that we all know each other if we're disabled, particularly if we're like in this kind of space, in this kind of realm, whether that be, you know, social media or, you know, TV, film. We know someone who knows someone who knows someone, or we might just directly know them themselves. And so you're so right in that, you know, it being condensed actually means that it's a bit more powerful. But having that idea that you experience more ableism in your day to day just blows my brain.
Like, I know we're going to get into it in terms of dating and stuff later on in the episode, but I will just, like, even the way that I'm treated on dating apps and that sort of thing has been drastically different in the US versus the UK. Truly, it's fascinating to me. And this is some tea, but I've matched with a couple of Brits that live in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
They're so much more understanding as a whole than Americans are. I don't know what's going on with Americans. Europeans are receptive to disability. And I think part of that is to the point too, like you mentioned, that a lot of the UK's understanding of disability pride is in media. It's very much ingrained into that discourse. And while I was living there, I was blown away by how many commercials and TV shows actually included disability. And physical and visible disability as well, like not just like
it's not like a one
neurodivergence or exactly, or being deaf, or insert more quote unquote palatable disabilities here, you know. Like there was a nice variance, I think, in UK media, whereas I come here and I don't see that. I really don't.
So I heard something super wild the other day whilst I was going through stats and figures of Disabled and Proud. And that is that 95% of people who listen to this podcast aren't subscribed. And so you know what would make a massive difference to the show, to me, and to the guests that we can get on is if you hit that subscribe button. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that be Apple, whether it be Spotify, whether you watch on YouTube. Please click that subscribe button because it really helps us get in the charts. It helps us get on more incredible guests and it helps the show expand, grow and thrive. And I'd really appreciate it. Please hit that subscribe button. Do you find, and this is just something that I've like kind of sprung off the top of my head because I remember from my days when I lived in the US, it was very much like, oh my gosh, you're a disabled woman, like congratulations for doing life, and I'm so proud of you for getting out of bed today, and like good for you that you're here and that you're living your life, and like, oh my god, like you're incredible. Do you find that you get a lot of that, or is it very much just like, okay, like we don't actually have any discourse on this whatsoever and we don't know how to approach this topic?
I definitely think I get a lot of the former thing that you said. Like, I there's this corner near where I live that there's a grocery store across the street. And for some reason, every time I'm waiting to cross the street to the grocery store, it's like the place that I seem to get approached the most. So I just associate that corner with somebody coming up to me and being like, oh my God, look at you. You are amazing. I'm so proud of you for just being on the street right now. And I'm like, yes, I am on the street. I am on the street. Just wild, really.
Mm-hmm. I think that is, it's like, it's so interesting how like Brits and Americans view disability and disability pride, and it's also quite nice to have the contrast as well, because I think whilst the UK doesn't always get it right, sometimes we do get certain bits and pieces all right, you know, and actually it's quite nice to know that in some respects we're doing quite well in comparison to other countries which should also be doing just as well.
100%. I mean, my biggest complaint about the UK in terms of like disability rights was always access. Like, and that's just like foundational structural, like being able to get into a building access. Yeah,
and for sure. And I think there's a lot to be said with, in particular, like I know you were saying that in America access is actually a lot better in terms of like structural building access. And I think that's probably because the US is a lot newer. And when we think of like, you know, cities in the UK, they've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so this is not to take away from the fact that they should be accessible, because we all know that there are things that can be done to buildings to retrofit them so that they do become accessible. There's a lot to be said in that, right? There's a lot of scope for goodness and also scope for learning, which is great. But something you said there about Europeans being more receptive to disability and dating in particular, I'd love to know, because you said that you get treated differently on dating apps between here and in the US. Can you go into a bit more detail about how and why?
I mean, I just think it's interesting that I feel like European men, as just lumping all of it together, because
I love
it goes
good,
beyond
like,
the UK.
Sweeping generalizations have been made, and it's so fine.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. We're gonna just notice that I am generalizing for a second, but of the European men I've come across, they have seemed less aware of the disability when we're out in public together. They seem less bothered. They seem to be less like paying attention to how other people are viewing the circumstances. And that's not to say all American men do that, because I've dated a lot of people.
A vast
amount from several different cultures. And like, I also think I can extend that honestly beyond Europe as well, and just go ahead and say that non-American men, because I like truly multicultural is happening in my dating life and dating pool right now. And I would say it's been great. It's been a wonderful experience, a lovely learning experience. But I just think, and I don't know if it's because maybe they've experienced some form of discrimination in the past because of being somebody from a foreign country. I don't know if it's the way that they were raised. I don't know if it's because of representation in these other countries. I don't know what it is. But there does seem to be a disconnect between me being a disabled woman and a lot of American men. Not all. I've met some lovely American men, but some for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of like how people approach the conversation of disability, I know some people immediately disclose, some people choose to disclose as and when suits them. And we are both physically disabled women, so we don't have that choice. It's very much there to see. Like, you can't not see our disabilities. How has that been for you navigating dating apps?
You know, it's something that I think in some ways, and I think this is honestly, because I have friends that are like, how are you going on so many dates? And I think the genuine answer is it acts as kind of like that first filter.
Yeah.
And so I'm really only matching with people, and I'm specifically thinking about like Hinge, right? Like, because this is the one that I use the most. It's the one I'm most comfortable with. It acts as that first filter as to whether or not somebody is even going to be interested in you, because you have a limited amount of likes in a day, because of the way the algorithm works. If somebody sends you a like on that app, like, to me, I see that as, okay, they've thought about it for a second. Yeah. Maybe not like longer than a second, but they've thought about it for a second.
They had a little moment.
Exactly. Whereas on like the ones where you just swipe, it's so gamified that I've noticed on there, like the connections I make on there are more hit or miss. Like, I may match with more people technically, but do they turn into anything? No. And so I think because of the intentionality behind that, and because I'm very upfront in my very first picture, I always make sure it's a full body shot that shows the prosthetic and the arm. And in doing so, I'm like, all right, I'm filtering out hopefully some scumbags in doing this and making it very clear.
I mean, I personally like to think of it as a bullshit filter. That's like how I see it.
I love that.
It's true though. I think because I'm in the same boat as you, and not that I've been on dating apps this year. Really, I was on them earlier this year, but then I kind of just stopped and just decided to live my life a little bit for me. And actually, maybe I'm coming around the idea of downloading them again. But you're right. Like, it's very much that instantaneous first filter. Like, it's almost like the first hurdle, isn't it? Because you're like, well, if you are going to send me a like, that's great because you've thought about it and you've seen who I am. Whereas I think this is where it must be very different for somebody who has a disability that's not visible to the naked eye. Like, that for me, I would never know when to disclose that. That would be something that I wouldn't know. I wouldn't have the vocabulary to do necessarily on my profile. So I think it's that conversation is very interesting, and being able to be so upfront and honest about who you are is also something that's really beautiful and very much tied into that disability pride, because you do have to have pride in who you are to be able to do that, because there's plenty of ways to hide your body or maneuver it in different pictures where you're not fully seen. So I think that is also super commendable.
Thank you. And I think I love that you brought up the idea of like what that conversation would look like if you have an invisible disability, because I think that has got to be so tough. And I think bringing light to the fact, like, I want to empathize with that a little bit, because I can't imagine. I hate having like deep. No, that's untrue. But there are certain conversations in dating that are awkward and uncomfortable. And I feel like that would be one that I would constantly be afraid to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm with you on that one. I think it would be something that would definitely play away at my mind. And I'm someone who every now and then can overthink quite a bit. And so I know that it would play on my brain until I just blurted it out. And whilst I am very eloquent on this podcast, sometimes in real life I am absolutely not. So
Oh, girl. Like, I mean, I'm thinking about it through the lens of like my big thing that I really struggle to bring up is my divorce.
Yeah.
Especially as like a 27-year-old girl. Like, I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, this sounds so ridiculous. I'm so young, and these men are going to judge, and they're going to have like preconceived beliefs about what this means. And oh gosh, it's always like a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the way that sometimes I just like word vomit it out
Mhm.
is kind of funny. Like I'm thinking
Yeah.
through all of these horrific moments, and I'm like, oh God, could I have said that any better? Probably.
Could I have said that with a little bit more finesse? It has potential.
We're still workshopping it. It's fine.
But actually, you have brought up your divorce, which is one of the main reasons why you moved back to the US. And how has that experience been as a disabled woman going through a divorce and then reintroducing herself into the dating world? Obviously, we just touched a little bit on the dating, but how have you navigated that transition, and how has that maybe affected or not affected your own disability pride?
Oh my God. Okay, there's a lot of layers to this conversation.
Honestly, I feel like I'm really pouring in all of my best efforts into one chat and I'm loving it.
You're doing amazing, sweetie. Very impressed at your questions here. They're making me think on a Tuesday afternoon. So thanks for
Do you
that.
know what? That's good for you. Like, it's good to use your neurons.
It is. It's really good. I really appreciate it. Okay, let me see. How do I want to say this? First of all, I think I need to disclose, like, at the time of this recording, like, still actively going through the legal
Yeah.
nightmare that has been my divorce. So there's only so much I can say on that process at this time.
Yeah. Of course.
However, there has been progression. I've been in this process now for over a year and a half. We're like coming up on 2 years pretty quick here, which is unhinged in so many ways. But we are working through
words.
it. I also don't have any
2
words.
years.
Remember when we were sitting in that Italian restaurant and I was telling you about all this for the first time?
That means that was nearly 2 years ago. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 18 months ago because I think I told you in like March of 2023. Yeah, and it's October now of 2024. So we're doing great.
Do not understand time. I know I say this an awful lot, but I honestly don't understand how quickly time goes. Like, everybody says that time is one thing after another, right? And I'm like, no, time for me is like a wall in front of me, and then things on it are like post-it notes, and I'm just grabbing post-it notes left, right, and center. Like, that's time for me. So the fact that has been nearly 2 years genuinely has blown my brain a little bit, because in my head it was like 6 months ago.
100%. And I like, when I think about how long it's been drug out, I'm just like, God, what are we doing? And because of that, like, I think when I first was starting the divorce process, I was like, I'm not going to date. I'm not going to talk about my dating life until it's done.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, like, we're over a year into it. We're over a year and a half into it. I'm like, I can't just put a pause on progressing my life for the rest of time because this won't wrap up.
Yeah.
Life's too short.
that in itself, you know, you can't put a pause on something just because in the background things need to be finalized or, you know, moved forward. And actually, like, I think that's a really powerful move that you have made, knowing that things aren't necessarily finalized, knowing things are still going through, like knowing there's this whole like legal jargon that's going on behind you, but actually you're like, no, I still need to live my life for me, and I will be dating and I will be experiencing all the things that I want to, regardless of whether this is going to be going on or not. Because I think you're right, you know, had you not been going through a divorce, you'd be doing these things anyway, so why would you let that stop you?
100%. And I think also, like, I have the added benefit of my ex lives across an ocean. It's not like the people I'm dating need to be worried about, like, oh, well, he's very much still a part of the picture. He's not. Like, we don't talk. Like Taylor Swift, now that we don't talk, we do not talk. It does not happen. So very removed. We love to see it. But I think like to answer your question about how like my perspective of disability has changed kind of like throughout this whole process, without again getting too in the weeds about the reason for the divorce or anything like that, I will just say my disability was not fully removed from the reasoning. It wasn't the full part, but it was something that was on the table.
It was sprinkled in there.
I mean, again, it's so ingrained into my life. There's no way that it can't be. Like it, if you're divorcing me, you're also divorcing like the idea of being with a disabled woman. And like, there's aspects to that. And maybe one day I can be a little bit more clear about some of that. But also, as much as I love the tea, like we don't necessarily always need to air out dirty laundry on the internet. However, something I do want to pinpoint is the difference I think is important between where I was when I met my ex-husband versus where I am now. Because I met him when I was 20 years old. We were engaged when I was 21. I was still in college, like not even fully graduated from university. And I was married before I had just turned 23. So there was this escalated timeline. I was really young. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think most importantly to this note, I had never really dated before. I'd been in a handful of like relationship-y situations because that's like what you do when you're in high school and college. Like you just kind of like meet this person. You're like, yes, we're dating now. And that's just how it goes. But I skipped out on that entire like early 20s, like 22 to 25, when you do go on dates and you do meet people out at bars. And I didn't have that experience. I was married. I was living in the like little housewife role during that time.
It is so wild to me that like by the age of 24 you were married, because our brains aren't even fully formed until we're 24.
You know, I felt my brain like click into place. I felt it. Like I know exactly when it was, the season. Like I know exactly when it happened.
The time.
I just woke up feeling so much more clear-headed like one day, and I was like, well, dang. This is not good.
Yeah, this is a situation that I'm in.
100%. It was a big wake-up call for me. But so going from like having never dated before into this period of, okay, now I'm divorced and dating pretty much for the first time in my life. What do I do with that? How does one do that? And my response has just been to be on the apps, go on as many dates as possible with as many different types of people as possible, and really learn what it is that I want and don't want. And that's what I set out to do this year. It's actually on my like, I write 50 goals a year. On my goal sheet, I was like, I want to go on 3 first dates a month. That's what I said.
I love that.
Thank you.
I love that. And I think that's a really great way of approaching dating. So I think dating can be such a difficult game to play. But I also equally, in the same vein, I think people really overthink it. And like sometimes I think you just got to go and have a bit of fun with it. And it's not, you know, if someone ghosts you, yes, that is absolutely horrific and it's all on them. It's awful behavior. But at the same time, like, people are weird anyway, so just take it all with a bit of a pinch of salt. And I think being able to be like, do you know what, I'm going to spend the year dating. I don't want to necessarily be in a relationship. If I find someone, that's fantastic, but actually I want to see what I want. I want to learn about myself, which I think is glorious, especially learning through other people, because actually I learn so much about myself having these conversations. So God only knows what it must be like when you're like, do you know what? I'm going to go and learn about myself through dating and like have different conversations with different people from different walks of life. Do you feel like you have learned a lot about yourself this year already?
Oh my God. So much. So much. It's actually been so eye-opening, I think, to what I put up with in my marriage and what I put up even in like the relationship aspect of that prior to, because that was essentially like one of my first experiences with love and dating. I just was like, yeah, this makes sense that this would be the treatment I deserve as a disabled person. And that's internalized ableism right there. The fact that I have disability pride now is what has allowed me to go out and date so many different people and be open and receptive to the different treatments I receive as a disabled woman from these people, but also just like getting to know myself in other regards as well, not just focusing on the disability aspect, and learning what I want in a partner and the type of treatment that I deserve from a partner has been very, very eye-opening.
I honestly love that for you. I do. I love that for you so much, because let's think about it. Like, I knew you pre-divorce. I know you post, we're going through the divorce, but it's going to be post-divorce at some point soon. And seeing the evolution of who you are as a person has been so lovely to watch. Don't get me wrong. Seeing your friends go through something hard is awful. It's never nice to see your friends in pain. But actually the growth that has come from this for you in particular, particularly like your personal growth. And I think you're right. Like, you know what you want in somebody else now. And that's gorgeous. That in itself is like a massive win and should be like something that you can celebrate, because your divorce has not been easy. And I'm not sugarcoating it for anyone. Like, I have been someone who's been there on the sidelines with you. It's not been something easy for you to go through. And watching you go through it has not necessarily been the nicest part, like nicest thing to watch. But actually, I'm so proud of you for, like I said, like going out and going dating and like discovering more about yourself and what you want and what you don't want. I just want to say a massive well done, because I'm so proud of you. Like, I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much. That means so much coming from you as somebody who like actually knows me too, and like you've seen both sides, because I do think I've had a massive character development in the last 2 years. Like, I mean, obviously it's impossible not to when you're faced with so much adversity and you're going through so much physical change. I mean, moving countries in and of itself is a lot, let alone ending a relationship, let alone moving your whole community. Like, so many things have changed this year. And it's been very difficult, but in many ways I feel like I have gotten nothing but positive feedback from the people in my life. They're just like, you have a different glow to you. You seem so much more yourself. You remind me of who you were like 6 years ago. And I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how much I'd shifted.
Like, insane, because I actually think like, someone's obviously told you that you glow different, and I absolutely 110% agree with them. You absolutely do. But really interestingly, you said something about shifting your communities, and now obviously you were a content creator in the UK, and you still kind of do content creation. You have a lot of UK fans, but you also had to move back to the US, which means that your audience obviously now becomes predominantly US based, because that's where you are, and that's how content creation works. But you were invited to the Kamala Harris party. It's the best way that I can describe it. How did that come about? Because this is amazing and wild and kind of cool.
So what we call it the Democratic National Convention. She just happens to be
a party, and you had like the perfect wording for it. So there we go.
There we go. Yes. Essentially, it's a way to like get people rallied and excited about standing behind the candidate. To my knowledge, that's essentially what it is. I'm sure there's a much more politically correct way to say what I just said. But alas, it was like a party, is like what it felt like, because for the first time in a really long time in the political space, I felt hope. I think I felt so much dread around this election up until, what was it, late July that Biden stepped out, I think, and Kamala stepped in. And I think from that moment, the shift has just been electric. And for the first time, I truly just am like, and maybe it's naive hope. Maybe I'm coming in with rose-colored glasses, but it just seems like the country is kind of unifying behind her. And I know the polls say differently, but I just have so much hope that like come election day, it's going to be good. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. And actually, something that I think is really important to Kamala as a candidate and disabled people as a whole is something to do with healthcare. Now, obviously in the UK, we have the NHS, so we don't really have to worry about if we break a bone, how much money that's going to cost. But that's very, very different in the US, and particularly for disabled people. Insurance, there's a whole other aspect of healthcare that we don't even have to think about in the UK. So does that translate to in the US, and how is that important to this particular like presidential campaign?
Well, Kamala Harris has been working with Joe Biden over the last 4 years to bring down the cost of medications, and they have successfully done so. And I know that that's a big part of like her platform, that she wants to continue to make sure that that's a priority, because the fact that insulin or I don't even know the other, there's so many different medications that cost so much money. I'll share mine. My medication costs $200 a month. $200 a month.
Where do you get that from? If you didn't have $200 spare, like what? If you don't have that money, does that mean that you don't get the medication?
Yeah. So I like don't use it in the way that I'm supposed to, because it costs so much money. So I try to make it last like 2-3 months instead of getting it every month like I should, or I'm supposed to, or whatever. So that's fun. So like that's just part of it though. And like there's other aspects as well of keeping insurance costs down, taking steps to ensuring as many people as possible. I think that's a big step too. Yeah. And we see a lot of that with Obamacare and kind of the work that he did when he was in office, obviously, gosh, over a decade ago now. Is that how math works? No, not over a decade. A decade ago, though. It is, yeah. And so I think we've seen so much good around that. And I think the comparison, right, is I watched the presidential debate a couple weeks ago, and when Donald Trump was asked about his plans for healthcare and reducing the cost of healthcare for Americans, he just said, "I have concepts of a plan."
Just concepts in the back of
just
his
concepts. Brain. They're ruminating. They're still like being sorted through.
Like, what?
So that's like what we're dealing with.
It's so for me personally, it's so interesting hearing these and having these conversations, particularly with people in the US, because I don't have to worry about insurance. I don't have to worry about paying for my medication. I think, if I had to go to the doctor tomorrow and pick up some antibiotics, I think it'd be like £14.50 for a course of antibiotics, which, grand scheme of things it's not a whole lot of money compared to, someone like yourself who's paying $200 per month. And as you said, you're kind of rationing it because it's so expensive. So what happens if you don't have insurance or you don't have that $200 extra? Is it a case of the reason it's $200 is because your insurance has brought it down, so actually it would be more? Or is it a case of you just wouldn't have the meds full stop and that would be it?
I feel like I maybe don't have the direct answer to this that you're looking for. Yeah. I know Medicare exists. I know that there are aspects, like there are programs, government programs out there that help people that don't necessarily make very much money, but there are income caps to that too. So disabled people are then like kind of in this rock and a hard place because they're the ones that need the most medical assistance, arguably. And yet they're being kept in poverty because they also can't earn more than a pretty low amount of money per month in order to receive these benefits where they don't have to pay in the same way that you would with insurance. But I think this is interesting because we talked about prescription meds and my personal prescription meds, but you just brought up antibiotics. And just to compare this to, you said like 14 pounds or something like that.
Yeah, it's like $14.50 or something like that.
Ready for this? I just had to get some antibiotics the other day, and they tried to charge me $71 when I got up to the till. And I was like, no, run it again. My insurance has to cover this. I said, I'm not paying for it. I will just have to go back to my doctor and get them to prescribe something else because, like, what do you mean? It's $71. Like, I don't have $71.
$71.
71.
Like, I genuinely don't have the words because I'm in a very privileged position to be in the UK and we have the NHS, and I will always die on the hill that the NHS is the best thing that's ever happened to the UK. But shit me, that is so much cash for something that realistically, I think someone once did, was it like I don't know whether it was a study or it was like someone who works in pharmaceuticals or whatever, like the markup on medicine is absolutely astronomical. And so I'm just imagining like what the markup is on that antibiotics, like, because obviously in the UK there's probably like some markup, right? There's going to be some form of margin. And then what does that then translate to in the US? It's obviously like, you know, well over triple the amount of money. And how much does that actually really cost to manufacture? Probably like a couple of pounds or like a couple of dollars at baseline, you know? And like that is so wild. And when we're thinking about, like, as you said, disabled people who kind of become restricted, they have a ceiling on what they can earn, just blows my brain.
Me too. Me too as well. Having lived in the UK too, because I mean, I benefited from the NHS while I was living in the UK. And I know what I would do because I would get medicine like pretty regularly. Yeah. They had a program where I think I paid £110 for the year, and then my meds were covered for the rest of the year. Like, even if I got meds that like would technically cost more than that, like I paid this fee once a year, and then I was able to get my meds essentially prepaid.
Wow. And that is what we're dealing with as disabled people.
It is. I do want to flag, my insurance did eventually cover the antibiotics and it was free. But like,
good for them, as they should.
As they should. But I think that's the point that you were asking. Like, what happens if you're not insured? You pay the $71.
Yeah. Wow. Do you know what? Like I said, the NHS is the best thing that's ever happened to the UK, and I will forever die on that hill. It's incredible. We are very, very fortunate. Oh. But actually, what we were talking about, circling it back around to what we were talking about, was communities. And in terms of like moving your community to like back to the US and making US-based content, how has your audience reacted to like the political content that you now make? Because when you're in the UK, it, like, you know, American politics wasn't necessarily like the first thing that you spoke about.
Right. I am very lucky, I will say this, that even while living in the UK, my American audience has always been bigger.
Love that.
It's not necessarily been massively bigger, but it's always been like the percentages have always skewed higher for US, and that's always been my largest demographic. So that's been a nice, helpful aspect to the transition. But I would say that generally speaking, a lot of people around the world are very tuned in to this election in the US right now. And not to put the United States like on a pedestal that I don't think we deserve necessarily, but I think there is some truth to it as well, that whatever happens in our election will impact people on a global scale to an extent.
Yeah, it does.
And so people are paying attention. People are concerned, rightfully so, even if they don't live here. And so I think I'm lucky because I have such a global audience that people are receptive to it across the board. And I also try to focus on more like issue-based things rather than specific, not that I've easily shared who I'm voting for several times across social media. Even in this podcast, I don't think it's very difficult to assume what's going on my ballot this November. But I think, like, generally speaking, I try to focus more on topics and issues that I think people can rally behind, because I think that is universal no matter where you live.
Super, super true. And actually, you know, you're right in saying that whoever wins this election. It does impact, globally, because we think about trade deals, we think about relationships between countries. It's not, this idea that countries are just standalone these days is actually quite redundant, and be quite foolish to think that realistically, because we live in such a hyper-connected world that global crumpling is a thing.
Yes, 100%. Absolutely.
So I would love to ask you for a little piece of advice that you would give a disabled person whilst they're in their dating journey. What's like your top disabled tip for the daters out there?
People they gotta hate me because I think I say this like a broken record all the time. But it really does. Like I talked about on here, like the difference that I was in, like the different phase of life I was in when I met my ex versus where I'm at in the dating phase now.
Yeah.
You have to, and people say this all the time, you have to love yourself before you can like love somebody else. I don't think that's true. I think you can fall in love and you can be in love with somebody no matter where you're at in your self-love journey. How healthy that love is going to be is dependent on how much you value yourself.
Ooh.
And so I would say, while dating, really make sure that you're still treating yourself right. Make sure that you're not giving everything to somebody that you've been on 2 dates with. Like, it's not that serious. I'm not going to lie to you all. Like, the dating scene is hell right now. Like, let's not mince words, because it is. It's not a good time out here. But 2 dates means nothing. You don't know this person. Don't go all in. Don't just like bend over backwards for them. If they're like, oh, can you hang out this day, but you were planning to do something else with somebody else, like don't cancel on your friend. Don't cancel on your self date with yourself for this new person. Like, still focus on filling your own cup first and allowing somebody to show how they show up for you over time.
Oh, you really have grown. Like, what a lovely little snippet.
Thank you. We've been through the weeds to get here, if I do say so myself.
I love that. But I think what you said just then, so important. Don't cancel on your pals. Don't cancel on yourself. You're right, 2 dates isn't really that serious. You're just getting to know someone. So actually, be true to yourself first. And something you said there about healthy love with yourself, I think that has encapsulated your journey recently, because I feel like the love that you have gained for yourself has become so healthy, and you have put so many beautiful boundaries in place that you can only ever grow greatness from it. And as I've already said in this podcast, I'm very proud of you as my friend, but being able to watch that journey online as well has been nothing short of phenomenal. So I just want to say I'm super proud of you.
Thank you, Brooke. That means so much. It definitely has been a journey, so I appreciate that you see that. And so, I don't know. You're such a doll. I appreciate you.
Oh, I know. But wrapping up this podcast, what is your one favorite bit of disability pride advice for anyone? And it could cover anything.
Oh my gosh. Disability pride advice? I always go back to this quote that my first ever therapist in college said, that it's okay to take up space. Because that was a monumental thing for me to hear back then. I don't think even, I think about that a lot, because I always am like, oh, it's the first person outside of my friend group or outside of my family to ever say that to me. I don't know if anybody ever said those words to me. It's okay that you take up space, until that was spoken to me. And this idea of taking up space and claiming space means that it just brings some sort of tangibility and some physicality to the situation that is different than just oh, love yourself more or know your worth or something like that. It's okay that you take up space, and you should take it up as loudly and as proudly as possible.
On that note, I think that's the perfect place to end this podcast, because that in itself was beautiful. I have absolutely loved this conversation. I have learned so much about America. So much. And like I said, I'm very proud of you as my friend, but also as a person who's watching your journey. I think it's been incredible, and well done you. Really well done you for going through the past 2 and a bit years, because they have been fucking mental.
Brooke, thank you for being such a good friend to me over the years. Like, while I was in the marriage, when I've been going through the whatever we're in now, this transition stage. All of it entirely. I so very much appreciate you and the work that you're doing for the community as well, because, you know, I think a big part of self-love and disability pride comes from community. And so I think that you are cultivating a space. You're taking up a space that is so beautiful, and I'm so proud of you as well.
Oh, I'm just going to stop it now. What is the difference like in like disability pride between the UK and the US, in your opinion?
I would expect that disability pride would be higher here in the US, but it's not. It's not. Disability is very much seen in the US as something that still needs to be overcome, something that is needs to be fixed. There's no like worth really placed on it yet. Whereas when I was in the UK, I don't know if it's because in some ways it's a smaller community or more condensed. Like everything seems like very close together in the UK. And so it's easier to rally a group together. Whereas here in the US, like outside of major city hubs, everything's very spread apart. And so getting people activated across state lines is really tough.
Yeah.
But I would say, generally speaking, here, there's much more accessibility. So from a standpoint of, again, that fix it mindset, there's a lot more structural innovation that's in place. So that's nice. But in terms of being welcoming and accepting and understanding, that is lost here in the US, where I feel like when I was in the UK, I didn't get as much ableism in my day-to-day life from just people that I pass by on the street. Europeans are receptive to disability. And I think part of that is to the point too, like you mentioned, that a lot of the UK's understanding of disability pride is in media. It's very much ingrained into that discourse. And while I was living there, I was blown away by how many commercials and TV shows actually included disability. And physical and visible disability as well. Like not just like
it's not like a one size
neurodivergence or exactly, or being deaf, or insert more quote unquote palatable disabilities here, you know. Like there was a nice variance, I think, in UK media, whereas I come here and I don't see that. I really don't.
We are both physically disabled women. How has that been for you navigating dating apps?
It acts as that first filter as to whether or not somebody is even going to be interested in you, because you have a limited amount of likes in a day, because of the way the algorithm works. If somebody sends you a like on that app, like, to me, I see that as, okay, they've thought about it for a second. Maybe not like longer than a second, but they've thought about it for a second.
They had a little moment.
Exactly. Whereas on like the ones where you just swipe, it's so gamified that I've noticed on there, like the connections I make on there are more hit or miss. Like I may match with more people technically, but do they turn into anything? No. And so I think because of the intentionality behind that, and because I'm very upfront in my very first picture, I always make sure it's a full body shot that shows the prosthetic and the arm. And in doing so, I'm like, all right, I'm filtering out hopefully some scumbags in doing this and making it very clear.
How has that experience been as a disabled woman going through a divorce and then reintroducing herself into the dating world? Obviously, we just touched a little bit on the dating, but how have you navigated that transition?
The difference, I think, is important between where I was when I met my ex-husband versus where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I met him when I was 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We were engaged when I was 21. I was still in college, like not even fully graduated from university.
Mm-hmm.
And I was married before I had just turned 23. So there was this escalated timeline. I was really young. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I think most importantly to this note, I had never really dated before. Going from like having never dated before into this period of, okay, now I'm divorced and dating pretty much for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
What do I do with that? How does one do that? And my response has just been to be on the apps, go on as many dates as possible with as many different types of people as possible, and really learn what it is that I want and don't want. For the first time in a really long time in the political space, I felt hope. I think I felt so much dread around this election up until, what was it, late July that Biden stepped out, I think, and Kamala stepped in. And I think from that moment, the shift has just been electric. And for the first time, I truly just am like, and maybe it's naive hope. Maybe I'm coming in with rose-colored glasses, but it just seems like the country is kind of unifying behind her. And I know the polls say differently, but I just have so much hope that like come election day, it's going to be good. It's going to be fine. Kamala Harris has been working with Joe Biden over the last 4 years to bring down the cost of medications, and they have successfully done so. And I know that that's a big part of like her platform, that she wants to continue to make sure that that's a priority, because the fact that insulin or I don't even know the other, there's so many different medications that cost so much money. I'll share mine. My medication costs $200 a month. Presidential debate a couple weeks ago. And when Donald Trump was asked about his plans for healthcare and reducing the cost of healthcare for Americans, he just said, I have concepts of a plan.
Just concepts in the back of
just
his
concepts. Brain. They're ruminating. They're still like being sorted through.
What?
So that's like what we're dealing with.
Yeah. How has your audience reacted to like the political content that you now make? Because when you were in the UK, it American politics wasn't necessarily like the first thing that you spoke about.
A lot of people around the world are very tuned in to this election in the US right now. And not to put the United States like on a pedestal that I don't think we deserve necessarily, but I think there is some truth to it as well, that whatever happens in our election will impact people on a global scale to an extent.
Yeah, it does.
And so people are paying attention. People are concerned, rightfully so, even if they don't live here. And so I think I'm lucky because I have such a global audience that people are receptive to it across the board. And I also try to focus on more like issue-based things rather than specific. Not that I've easily shared who I'm voting for several times across social media. Even in this podcast, I don't think it's very difficult to assume what's going on my ballot this November. But I think, like, generally speaking, I try to focus more on topics and issues that I think people can rally behind, because I think that is universal no matter where you live.